I really don't. I think what it means is that we have to find meaning in what we're doing. And however I need for that to happen, it's okay. And your experience may be very different than mine. If you believe in transubstantiation, fabulous. If you don't, fabulous. I once asked Reverend Troy Perry if there was a certain way in MCC we really needed to do communion. Because I'm going to tell you, coming from a Pentecostal church in my growing up, communion was a very, very, very special, quiet, solemn, tear-jerking service. And the whole service was built around that. And you had to come up and kneel around the altar and cry and pray and beg forgiveness and search your soul. And thank God it only happened every couple of years. And they had this unleavened bread that somebody in the church would bake, and it was hard as a brick. It would break your teeth. And it sounded, and my granddad was a farmer, and he had hogs, and I always thought when they were chewing around the altar, it sounded like the hogs at the trough. I was like, oh my God, this sounds like the hogs at the trough. I mean, it didn't mean to sound like that, and I don't mean to minimalize it, but I'm saying that was my experience. And while it was a real meaningful service, it is gut-wrenching. It is just gut-wrenching to search your whole life and to try to find something. Even if you hadn't done anything wrong, you were trying to find something you might have done wrong. To get rid of it, you wanted to present yourself holy and perfect. And we're just not. We're not perfect. We're holy, but we're not perfect. And then there were the Catholics on the other end of the spectrum that were used to going up there, and boy, they could whip right through that. They could do that soul searching just like that. Got it? Ready to come to the table? Just like that. And they hadn't had church until they came to the table. Hello? They didn't have church until they had been to the table. They didn't care about the singing. They didn't care about the sermon, the homily. They had to get to the table because they knew that their sins had been forgiven once they got to the table. It was done. It was a done deal. Free for another week. No offense. I don't mean to minimize. Please don't get me wrong. But truly, I mean, this is what I see. But they took it, now don't get me wrong, they took it very seriously. And some of you came from that tradition, and you know, you take it very seriously. So I don't mean to minimalize what it really means to you, but what I'm saying is, even from those ends of the spectrum, I love that in our denomination, you can believe it just as extreme one way as the other, and it's okay. You find meaning in what it is for you. I've had people that came out of those churches that had communion, and they say, I just can't come to the table. I just can't come to the table. It brings back too many awful memories of what I came out of. That's okay. Nobody's requiring you to come to the table. Doesn't mean you're being disrespectful. It just means you don't have to relive those old memories. It's okay. Just sit and sing and worship and pray, or come and kneel, or come and stand before the altar, or just pray at your seat. I've had other people that just couldn't wait to get to the table. They just couldn't wait because that really meant something to them. They had wonderful memories of that. Whatever it means to you, it's okay. Just find the meaning. In 1967, there was a movie called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? I think we even have a picture of it. Do you remember this movie? Yes. I hope you young folks have seen it. That's right. Sidney Poitier came to dinner. Here was a black man coming to dinner with his white girlfriend to meet the family. That's why it was called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Remember, it was 1967. Man, did this push some boundaries. Did this push the envelope? Oh my goodness. Family had to do a whole lot of adjusting for this to work out. But I want to tell you something. A year later, in 1968, Reverend Elder Troy Perry in Los Angeles, California, started putting out ads in the local newspapers that he was going to hold a worship service at his apartment. No musical instruments. So they put an LP record on of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. That's just true. And held the first MCC. It wasn't even called that then, Metropolitan Community Church. It was just somebody having prayer meeting at their house. 12 people, like 12 disciples, showed up at that first service. And in that first service, there were black people and white people. It was a diverse group. And I will tell you, Reverend Elder Troy Perry came from the same background I did. But he recognized immediately that there were going to be people from other backgrounds there. So not only did they have the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing at the first MCC service, they also, at the end of that service, with his lively preaching, they ended with people having communion. And as far as we know, this was the first time a group of gay Christians had gotten together to do this in such a public way. And from that, we have churches all over the world today called Metropolitan Community Church. From that first meeting, there were people that flew in. There was a black man, that black businessman, that flew in from Phoenix to be at that service because he had seen it advertised. I visited him just a few years ago in a nursing home in Long Beach, California. And he told me all about it and how wonderful it was to be there. And he said, I had just never seen anything like that before. I couldn't believe it was going to happen. I couldn't believe in 1968 that he would actually put that out there, put his address and his phone number in the paper and openly advertise for gay and lesbian people to come to a Christian worship service. It's a wonder the police didn't show up at his address and arrest everybody. Or worse. Or worse. But God was with them. God was with them. That traditional met the progressive, and all was well because there was enough room for both. Just like the night that Jesus had a meal with his disciples. It was a traditional ceremony, but a very progressive thought that Jesus said everybody in this room is welcome. Jesus said everybody is welcome in this room to come to this table. Jesus even changed it up because, his words of institution were not the same. He broke from the tradition and gave them some new words. Because at the end of the meal, he's the one that took that bread and said, this is my body. That wasn't in the original. Jesus broke from the traditional and gave them something new. And he said, this is my body that's broken for you. And this is my blood that is shed for you for the forgiveness of all your sins. Jesus knew something. Jesus had already experienced in all of his ministry, this 3 years of ministry. He only had 3 years of ministry. And in those 3 years of ministry, he had learned, though, that eating with people, if you break bread with people, you break down barriers. Breaking bread breaks barriers. That would have been a good sermon title too, wouldn't it? Breaking bread breaks barriers. It still does. It still does. You and I can be from one end of the spectrum to the other in theology, theological beliefs. But if we sit down and eat together, we can break down some barriers and find some common space. We can be from one end of the spectrum to the other politically. But if we sit down and eat together, we can break down some barriers. We may not can talk about politics, but we can find some common ground of humanity. For many years, our denomination, Metropolitan Community Church, tried to be recognized as an official church. We sent representatives every year to the World Council of Churches, and we petitioned to become an internationally recognized denomination. And year after year, they voted it down. No gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender people at the World Council of Churches. No, 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 no. Now I want to just tell you, they weren't just mean about it. So I don't want you to go think something horrible about them. They actually did do some research. A couple of weeks I heard Reverend Elder Ken Martin talk about when he was pastoring in North Hollywood, California. And he said that they called him and said, we've got some representatives from the World Council of Churches. We want to bring them over to your church because y'all keep petitioning us to be a member. And one of the things that we just can't agree on is communion. Because, you know, with the World Council of Churches, there are rules. And some of you, I mean, y'all keep telling us that we don't understand how everybody can come to the table. So we'd like to come over and talk with you. Would you have a couple of your members come in and explain to us? We'd like to show up at your church one day. So he said, sure. And he got a couple of his members. And he said that at the specified time that they were to arrive, all of a sudden, he saw a line of police cars. And then right after them was a line of limousines. And he said it looked like Washington, D.C., when all of these big dignitaries come in from all over the world. He said there were dignitaries from all of the major denominations, from all over the world. And they were brought in, the whole entourage brought in these limousines, protected by the police. And they come into our MCC in North Hollywood, California, and sit down. And Reverend Ken said his heart just like, oh my God. I mean, I knew they were coming to ask questions. I didn't know the bigwigs were really coming. But he said his church members came in, and they began to ask them questions, and they demonstrated for them how we offer communion at MCC. And they just could not get over it. They sat in amazement, he said. They could not get that everybody could just come to... And our people, our MCC people, were sitting there also in amazement. That it was so simple. That even when Jesus had his Last Supper, it didn't take the Da Vinci Code to see that everybody at the table was welcome. Everybody in the room was welcome. Does anybody remember Judas? Judas took communion. Judas took, I can't even say his name. Judas took the meal. He took the bread and the body for the forgiveness of his sins. And I'll just leave that with you because some of you believe one way and some another. Some believe he got forgiven and some believe he didn't. I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't in his heart. We'll find out on the other.